All right. How we doing, Vox? Good. Okay, here's the thing. Oftentimes, it is much better to see an example of something than to just read the rules. How many of you, if you got a new game of some sort, you're not reading the rule book, you're trying to jump in and figure it out on your own? Anybody? Anybody do that with furniture? You see the picture of the furniture, you're not opening the thing. We were some of us were helping a friend move this week, and I love the instructions. I love going through. But sometimes you buy instructions or you buy this thing and the instructions are not good. They are not good instructions. It is like, insert screw into side. And you're like, of what piece? Of where? Which screw? How many? Right? You just have so many questions. And then there's a picture. And it helps you kind of figure out. You're like, okay, this has to go here. This is where these pieces go. Sometimes you need an example to understand the instructions. How many of you have been watching World Cup? Anybody been watching World Cup? Okay. You don't have to watch it anymore. None of the good teams are left. And so, but here's part of the thing. One of the most controversial parts of the World Cup is a rule that nobody understands. Nobody understands it. And I want to read it to you. I want to read you. This is from the FIFA rule book. Here's what it says. A player is in an offside position if any part of the head, body, or feet is in the opponent's half, excluding the halfway line, and any part of the head, body, or feet is nearer to the opponent's goal line than both the ball and the second last opponent, and incurs an offside offense when gaining an advantage by playing the ball. Now, some of you already know what an offside is, but for those of you who are not familiar with an offside, before I read the description, how many of you immediately understood what we're talking about? Yeah, I didn't think so. So real quick, I have a picture here, but for whatever reason, I cannot discern that Colombia got an offsides there, and I think that game was rigged. So maybe this is a bad example. That was my little World Cup jab. Tonight, I want to talk to you guys about some different examples. We've been in a 3-week series right now talking about being critics of the culture, particularly how are we as Christians supposed to respond to it? What does God think about it? Here's what we have said every single week, is that God cares about what you consume because what you consume consumes you. And so tonight, I want to not just give us some ideas, I want to take us to people in the Bible that lived out some of the things that we've talked about so far in this. So if you've got a Bible, go with me tonight to Matthew chapter 3. And I want to show you somebody there, but in Matthew chapter 3, we're going to be introduced to someone. But going back to our very first week in the series, we talked about how Jesus in Luke chapter 6 says, what you say flows from what is in your heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. So we've said it a billion ways. You become what you behold. You become what you scroll. What we fill what we fill our lives with is what ultimately comes out of us. Ultimately, if you have a hard time, if you come to one of your leaders and you say, hey, you know what, I have a really hard time with my mouth, with my language. I say things that I know are ungodly. I say things out of my mouth. I think it would not be difficult for our leaders to go, hey, tell me about what you're listening to. Tell me about what you're watching. Tell me about who you surround yourself with. Tell me about some of these things. And I would be amazed if you said, gosh, none of my music has language. None of the TV shows I watch have language. None of the stuff I do, like none of that comes from there. My friends don't do it, so I don't know where I would be really surprised if you said that. Do you know why? Because from the overflow of your heart, your mouth speaks. Whatever you fill your life with is going to come out of you. And so the very first person we see tonight is a man named John the Baptist, is what the Bible calls him. I call him John the Baptizer, but in Matthew chapter 3, we're introduced to this guy. It says this: in those days, John the Baptist came to the Judean wilderness and began preaching. His message was, repent of your sins and turn to God, for the kingdom of heaven is near. John was Jesus' cousin. Before Jesus started his ministry, John started a ministry. John, just to be clear, when it says John the Baptist, it was because John baptized people, not because he belonged to the Baptist churches. Like, I just feel like that's important for some people to hear. So John the Baptist, if you notice something, it says that John is in the wilderness. John leaves the city, he leaves the towns, and he goes into the wild, away from everyone, away from everything. It continues in verse 4, and it says, John's clothes were woven from coarse camel hair. He wore a leather belt around his waist. For food, he ate locusts and wild honey. This is a different man. Some of y'all don't even know what a locust is. This is a locust. This is a grasshopper, right? I was this close to buying like chocolate-covered ones and being like, hey, pass them out. Y'all eat them. You know that. But those are expensive. That's not cheap. I thought I'd be left with like a whole bag of like 3 pounds of grasshoppers, oh man. So it says that John removes himself completely from normal culture. He removes himself from the towns. He removes himself from everything. Why does he do this? Because John is a remover. Say remover. John decides to, instead of continue to put himself in positions where he knows he's going to be influenced, instead of putting himself in these places, he goes outside and he says, you know what? There are things in my life that I do not need. There's comforts in my life that I do not need. There's things in my life that I need to cut out of my life. And what John does is he says, I don't need to be around this. What I need is God. Because the kingdom, Jesus, God, this is what's most important. And so instead of sacrificing my soul for a TV show, John goes, let me remove myself from the culture around me. Let me become separate. Let me get out of this. Let me remove myself from this. And he goes into the wild. I think what we see in John's example is something that is actually valuable. The very first week we talked about, hey, there are things in your life that some of you need to remove out of your life. John is a great example. He goes and he says, I'm going to be separate from this. And I think that is a position that Christians ought to have. Can I tell you something? I'm picky about the movies that I watch, and I love movies. I've told you this like 20 times this year. I love movies. I'm obsessed about movies. But you know what? Years ago, I decided that there was some content in movies that I did not need to put in front of my eyes. There were some things in movies that I recognized, hey, you know what? I don't need to see this. I don't need to hear this. I don't need this to be around me. Years ago, like when I was in high school, when I was your age, I struggled with pornography. And the Lord defeated that in my life. And so there's no reason for me to continue to put something. I don't need naked people in the movies that I'm watching because I know that the Lord has defeated that, but I'm not trying to reignite something. Do you understand? I'm not trying to go back. I just decided, hey, that doesn't belong in my life anymore because the enemy used it once, he could use it again, and I'm not going to make that mistake. Do you follow me? And so there are things that I go, hey, no, I'm not going to participate in that. Removed out of my life. Let me share something with you that there is some John the Baptist that some of you need to do in your own life. Of going, hey, this cannot continue to live here. I've got to move out of this. I got to remove myself from this situation. I've got to take myself out of this scene. I've got to remove myself from this content. I can't keep listening to this. I can't keep watching this. It's affecting my mood, my behavior, my relationships. It's affecting my soul. John the Baptist is our first example tonight. He removes himself. Then in week two, we looked at what Paul is dealing with in the church in Corinth, and he writes in 1 Corinthians 10, and he says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, because to him, eating and drinking was a cultural thing in the same way that like we're talking about like listening to music and watching TV shows and scrolling online and all of those things, playing video games, like those are our cultural things. For Paul, it was eating and drinking. Those were the cultural things. He says, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God, and you should imitate me just as I imitate Christ. Paul talks about, hey, listen, there are moments in which it's not just saying, hey, I'm just going to get rid of everything, but Paul talks about another filter, a lens in which we say, is this good for me? Yeah, maybe it's allowed, but is it good? And then maybe it's okay, but is it good for the people around me? And is it glorifying to God? Is there a way that this honors God? And I want to show you tonight our second person. We had John the Baptizer, the remover. And I want to introduce you to a man named Daniel, the refuser. Daniel's a guy who lived in the 600s BC. And so in the 600s, he grew up in Israel. And at that time, Jerusalem was captured by the empire Babylon. Babylon had come in, they were conquering, and they conquer Jerusalem, and they come up with this idea. In fact, I think, the destruction of Jerusalem was intense, and one of the things that Babylon would do everywhere that they went was when they conquered a place, they knew that they needed to affect the culture, because culture is actually more powerful than anything else. And so in order for Babylon to affect and change the culture, what they would do is they would conquer a place and they would look for the smartest people and the smartest young people. They would look for the most attractive young people. Basically, they were looking for influencers. They would take them back to Babylon and put them in schools. We see this in Daniel chapter 1. The command in verse 4 goes out and it says, hey, select those who are healthy, who are strong, who are attractive, who are intelligent. And what we're going to do is we're going to take them back to Babylon, and we are going to educate them and indoctrinate them in our ways, in our culture, in our religion. And so part of this, Daniel and the story picks up with Daniel and a few of his friends, and they are in Babylonian schools. Most likely they're forced to participate in classes on witchcraft and astrology. That was part of Babylonian education, right? So they're learning about magic, and they're learning about these things, and not like magic where they were like, hey, what card am I holding up behind my back? They were like, it was like the Babylonians had their own gods, and they would make sacrifices, and they would there were demons that participated in this to help perpetuate the lie that the magic was working. And so this is all actually bad. And this is dangerous. And Daniel and his friends are forced to be a part of it without their permission. Daniel 1:6, it says, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen from Judah. And the chief renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, Azariah was called Abednego. Some of you have never heard the names Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, but you've watched enough VeggieTales to know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so these are the guys, these 4 guys. I mean, watch this. If somebody showed up and was like, hey, your religion is wrong, you're coming with me, I'm going to force you through my education system, I'm going to teach you what is true, and also, I mean, some of us would be like, this sucks, and you do that about school right now anyway, but this would be a whole different level. But what's crazy is these guys come in and they're like, we're going to change your names. You don't even get your own name anymore. Like, that's like the one thing that is personal about you that you feel like you have some identity in, some stake in. And you know what's interesting about this? They do not fight. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Daniel, they don't fight about their names. They don't fight about what they're being taught. They don't fight about any of that. They don't push back about any of that. Here's what they do fight about. Verse 8, Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. I encourage you, go back and read chapter 1 of the book of Daniel, and you'll see the full picture. But here's what happens. For Israelites, for the Jews, they had been given rules by God about what they were allowed to eat and what they were not allowed to eat. And the Babylonians were saying, we are going to make you eat certain things that would be disobedient to your God. That's the moment when Daniel stands up and he says, hey, you know what? I refuse to participate in this. Listen, you can do stuff around me. You can do stuff to me. You can change my name. You can say all you want, but I'm not going to allow you to make me disobey God. And it's in this moment that Daniel stands up on behalf of his friends, and he goes to the chief of staff and he says, hey, can we do something? Can we try eating our food our way? And if it works, and we are doing well in our classes, if we're doing well in all of our training, you let us keep it. And the guy says, let's run the experiment. And they do it, and it works. Daniel stood up for what was right in that moment. And there are going to be moments where you are going to have to stand up to do what is right. I know where this kind of fits in, because you and your friends have hung out a lot, and you guys have a favorite movie series, and you guys have watched you have watched all 16 movies in the Naked and Bloody Murder movies, like all 16 of the movies, and the 17th one is coming out this week. And all of your friends are like, hey, we got to go and watch this. We got to go and watch this together. It has every kind of sin we could imagine thrown into one movie, but we've all seen all of the other ones. If you're curious, that is not a real movie. Some of you are like, IMDb right now. But I wonder what would happen if you said, hey, wait, hold up, everybody. I don't know that this is good for any of us. In fact, maybe we can do something else this weekend. Maybe we don't have to. Maybe we are not obligated, even though we have done 16 out of 17. Maybe we do not have to finish this thing that we've started because it is not good for our souls. Maybe you have the courage to stand up when there's a moment. And here's the deal. Daniel had to stand up in front of all of his peers, in front of his boss, in front of all of these and all of these authorities. There are going to be moments where you might have to have a tough conversation with a boss. You're going to have tougher conversations with your friends about what is right and wrong and what is good, and go, hey, actually, I don't know that we can go here. And Daniel is one who, in his life and in his example, he is a refuser. He's not a whiner. He's one who is encouraging people to do what is good. And then last week, we talked about how God has created us to be creative. He's created us to be creators. We looked at Genesis chapter 1, and Genesis says that God is creative and he made you to be just like him. And so when we go to work and when we do art and when we build networks and relationships and when we're in these things, we're building things, we're being creative. There's a creativity that we are drawn to. Colossians 1:20 we looked at, it says that God is reconciling everything to himself, which means that God, who's created things, is hoping that we can join him in helping to restore the brokenness in the world. That's where we're supposed to use our creativity, on mission with God. And I want to look at the man who wrote these words himself, a guy named Paul, who is our final example tonight, and he's the reuser. We have John the Baptist, the remover, we have Daniel, the refuser, and we have Paul, the reuser. And yes, I did make all of them rhyme. It was really hard. Had like thesaurus pulled up, all kinds of stuff. Paul, the reuser. The longest sermon that we have from Paul is in the book of Acts. It's Acts chapter 17. Paul shows up in a city called Athens. Anybody ever heard of it? It's in Greece. There was a very famous hill in Greece called the Areopagus. This is it, the Areopagus. And philosophers and scholars would gather on this hill and they would debate and they would argue philosophy and they would talk about religion and they would get up there and it was like the nerdiest Reddit thread you've ever been to, right? Like it's just this, like all of these guys like going on, well, what if nothing is real? And then somebody's like, what if everything is real, right? And it's just this kind of conversation back and forth. And Paul shows up and he's trying to explain to these guys who Jesus is, but most of them were completely unaware of the Bible before this conversation. Most of them were completely unaware of the story of Jesus. They had no idea who Jesus was. Most of them would actually be really unfamiliar with even Jewish beliefs. Like they would be far removed. Almost all of these guys had grown up in Greek religion or Roman religion. They had some other thoughts in mind. And so Paul shows up and he goes to preach to this group in Acts 17. And he preaches something. In verse 24, he says, He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. Now, I jumped into the middle of his sermon. That's not where he started. That would be a terrible start. I'm jumping in right to the middle because I want you to see something. The God who made the world and everything in that. Is that Greek religion, Roman religion, or our religion? Yes. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. Greek religion, Roman religion, or our religion? Yes. He doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. That last verse, human hands can't serve his needs, and he doesn't live in man-made temples, are quotes from two different guys. One of them is a Greek Stoic philosopher named Seneca the Younger. And the other one was a quote from a guy who doesn't have any cool Google pictures named Zeno of Citium. In the middle of this, Paul begins to quote some things from other people's culture. And he's using them in his conversation about, oh, you've read that God doesn't live in temples, right? And they're like, yeah, Seneca. Man, I got that guy on vinyl, and he's like, good. I'm glad you have him on vinyl. Now track with me. He goes, he himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. Now, as he's talking about our God. He's talking about Yahweh. He's talking about Jesus. But in that group, most of them are like, yes, Zeus is the one who did that. Zeus is the God who did that. Yes, we are following, we are tracking with you, because most of them had grown up reading the stories, the mythology of Zeus and some of these things. So they'd be very familiar with how humans came and how Zeus gave life and breath through Prometheus and all of these things and the Titans and all of that. Verse 26. From one man he created all the nations through the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall. He determined their boundaries. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. Maybe it wouldn't surprise you at this point in my message to point out that he's quoting from Plato, the philosopher. And he continues to quote Epimenides, one of the Greek songwriters, and another playwright named Aratus, all in this message. And then near the end of it, and he says, but the part that you guys don't know is that there was a man named Jesus, and he ends his sermon talking about Jesus resurrecting from the dead. But what I love is that Paul uses their culture and says, wait, I see what I know what you think. I know what you sing about. I know what you listen to. I know some of these things, and let me tie these in and point them back to Jesus. Let me take what's normal for you and use this and bring you back to Jesus. Paul was somebody who reused their culture for the glory. Now, Romans chapter 12, verse 2 gives us a command that so many of you know. It says this: do not copy the behavior and the customs of this world. Don't copy the culture, the rhythms, the routines of this world. Instead, let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. We're actually not supposed to be imitators of the world. We're supposed to be imitators of Jesus. And if our lives look identical to every single person around us, then we're missing something. If there's no difference between you and people who do not follow Jesus, other than the fact then you have a slightly penciled in schedule for Wednesdays at 7 o'clock. If there's no other difference, then we're doing something wrong. Romans 12 says, be transformed not by the culture, but by the Spirit of God. And so the question that I think is important tonight is, which example do we follow? Do we follow the example of John and we remove ourselves from parts of the culture? We cut things out and we say, hey, I can't participate in this. I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm not going to allow this into my life. Do we follow the way of Daniel, where we step up to the culture? We call out what is broken and wrong in it. We become critics, like this series is called, and we refuse these things, even if it's with our friends. Do we follow the way of Paul, the example of Paul, and we go, okay, let me take this, but let me use this for God's purpose and God's kingdom. Let me take this and find a way that I can use this for God's glory. Which one are we to follow? Yes. See, there are some moments in my life where I follow the example of John, and there's things that I've said, hey, I cannot participate in this, and I'm not going to allow this into my life. And believe it or not, there are songs, it's crazy to me. Every time I look to see what the most played songs are in America, I promise you, I don't know what they sound like. Isn't that weird? Because I just decided, hey, you know what? I just don't need that. I don't. Am I missing some things? Maybe. Maybe there's some good beats. But I just don't need it. In some parts of my life, I recognize that, man, I've got to stand up, and there are moments that I have to have some uncomfortable, awkward conversations with people to challenge what we have accepted as normal in the culture and go, hey, I don't think that is right. In fact, I think that 90% of the sermons I preach from the stage are me having just a prolonged conversation with you as kind of my friends going, hey guys, there's something that I see happening around you all the time, and I don't know that it's good. Can I lead you in something better? And then there are moments where we're just like Paul, we're going, hey, maybe I can use this. Maybe I can take this video game and we can do something with this. Maybe I can take the idea from this movie. Maybe we could take this song. Maybe we could have a conversation. Maybe there's something here. I think it's a little bit of all three. But I think we need to be honest. Because most of us would probably prefer to be reusers instead of refusers. And I think you actually have to work through it in this order. I think there's things that you have to look into your life and say, hey, I can't allow this into my life before I can say, how can I use all of this? I think there's got to be moments where you identify, hey, this is something that is broken around me, and I got to speak to it, and I got to stand up for it or to it. And so tonight, we're going to go into a time of worship because I love taking a moment for us to reflect on the message, wrestle it with God, pray through it, and give Him glory. And so in just a moment, I'm going to invite us to stand and come forward. But what I want to encourage tonight is that you think about, where do I need to be a remover or a refuser or a reuser? Can I pray for you? Father God, we pray that your Holy Spirit would speak to us tonight, would lead us into your truth, would help us see where we are, and God, help us to identify places where we need to remove, or we need to refuse, or we have the opportunity to reuse. I love that verse where Jesus, we're reminded to be as innocent as doves, but really as cunning as snakes. Like this idea of we want to be innocent and holy and perfect before you. So God, we do not want to allow what is evil to be overflowing and overwhelming in our lives. And at the same time, God, we recognize that we are in the world, not of the world. And so we are going to be reconciling the world back to you. God, help us to find our way in the middle. We pray this in Jesus' name.